Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Your Bread and Butter podcast. I'm Ryan Cummings.
And I'm Andrew Boudry. Today, it's going to be Retirement Condition, Lifestyle Choices in Retirement, Part 1, as we look to see how you can make a plan that fits your current lifestyle.
Before we jump into today, I had some retirement jokes ready to go, but none of them work anymore.
See you soon.
Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a registered broker-dealer. Member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors Incorporated, a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Private Financial Design LLC are not affiliated.
Bread and butter.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Your Bread and Butter podcast. Today, we're talking about retirement condition, lifestyles choices in retirement. We're glad that you're with us today, and we're going to explore the someday window and how lifestyle choices shape your retirement planning. We're going to cover what gets cheaper, what gets more expensive, and how to prepare for it.
I think the idea behind any retirement picture, any goal, just like any other financial goal, is envisioning that lifestyle. What's the cost? I always, even with clients, I'll use this analogy all the time of, if a client asks me, well, how much do they need to buy a home? When can they buy their home? How much they need to buy the home? Well, one of the most important questions of that is, how much does the home cost? Figure out your budget. Well, retirement's no different. As you're starting to envision your retirement, what are you going to be doing every day? What is that cost going to look like? And you can't know that cost without envisioning that someday of your free Saturdays with no obligations, or maybe going out to eat a few nights a week. Are you going to be having activities throughout the week? You have some clients who say, well, I'm going to play pickleball more. I'm going to golf every day. And well, you can't do that every single day. It might be part of your retirement. And I think it's just trying to get that vision for yourself, so you're not lost as you get into retirement.
I like that phrase too, the someday window, because that's how we should look at it. It's the view outside of the window, what you want to look at when you're actually in retirement. And I have some amazing phrases that I've actually written down over the years that people have shared with me in their retirement that, I'll spread throughout the broadcast. But truthfully, one of the funniest ones I ever heard, which made me pause for thought, was one of my retirees came back to me and said, I don't have a lot on my calendar except for one thing. I said, what's that? And he goes, feed the cat. No, we don't want your retirement to be like that. So let's talk a little bit about the someday window activity map.
Yeah, I think it's looking at common priorities, I guess you could say, that people have as they go into retirement. Maybe going out to eat more in retirement, travel as well. You've got all this free time. You're not working anymore. Although when it comes to free time, I think you talk about it all the time too, some retirees, when they make that transition, well, they're doing other things, and they wonder how they got all these other things done while they were still working.
Yeah, that's why some retirees become detectives, because they want to discover where their day go. How did that happen? And I've heard that so many times.
Right, but if you're the person you like more physical activities, it could be things like, walking, hiking, maybe pickleball, golf, like you talked about earlier. Or, other things too, like more low-key things around the house, gardening, hobbies you have in home, arts and crafts, whatever your interests are. I think it's just finding those hobbies, finding those interests, and having a few of them, because like we talked about earlier, you can't do one thing all day, every day, or
no,
you could probably be afford of it.
No, yeah, even clients and friends I've had that, all they ever did was play golf or tennis. When they get to an age where physically that's just not as fun anymore. And truthfully, if that's all you got to going for you, that could be a little tough down the road. So we're going to talk a little bit about today about work, stop work, phase out. What normally we try to recommend to our retirees is to try to glide into retirement, because retirement isn't just some black and white thing. We get people saying that stuff all the time. One of the big things to get out of people's minds right now is that somehow people think that when they retire, that somehow the federal government and the IRS gives them some blessing of like they're going to pay lower in tax. It's not true. Anyway, but options include, when you're going through this, you could just stop working entirely. Though I don't find that to be the best for most people. Phasing out working part-time or consulting, which is a much more popular way for people to retire these days. And then creating sort of a passion income stream where people, they love doing photography or artwork. They love writing poetry or music, or they have wood hobbies, or we have clients that raise bees or things like that. That it does bring some income in and they're following their passions. But the problem that we have with most of our clients is what we call dough phobia, the idea of the fear of spending your own savings. And so sometimes that gets in the way of actually people planning a proper retirement.
It can. I mean, it's a shift in your mindset. We're taught all our lives, our working careers, to save, to try to limit your spendings, try to build up that cushion. And retirement is a complete 180. You're spending that cushion that you worked so hard to save, but while it's a tough thing mentally for some people to get over, it's a necessary thing, and it's actually not a bad thing as long as you run the numbers, you're doing it appropriately at a reasonable rate. It's not something you need to be scared of as long as you've done the proper planning.
Yeah.
But going back to even some of the options for work that you were talking about earlier, I think it's a mix of all of those things of, like you said, for the stopping immediately, that's really in most people's situations probably not the best unless you're someone who's in maybe a very physically demanding field.
Right.
I think that's where it's a different conversation. You're a blue collar worker, your body's taking a beating every single day. That's where maybe that is the best path for you.
But for a lot of our our medical people, with nurses, doctors, people who are in the medical field who've been serving, yes, they've been paid, but they've been serving people for a long time. Teachers can be the same way. They're so built into the serving and taking care of people mode, just to walk away from that cold turkey is really hard. I see a lot of our nurses and doctors actually work per diem to try to kind of glide into that phase. Lawyers can do the same thing. But I do think there is that portion of it. So we should look a little bit about where some of these expenses occur and how they work. Some costs actually drop when you are in retirement.
Yeah, I think sometimes, and the caution flag here is sometimes people overestimate these, like you were talking about with taxes, but some of these things you can see some expenses go down. Commuting expense, I think, is a big one. Gas, car payments, potentially public, transportation. If you're in an area where you use public transportation, meals at work. Yeah, you might be someone who brings in lunch every so often, but maybe you don't every single day. And that cup of coffee you get on the way to work, that lunch you get at lunchtime, those all could be things that go away. And then the big one, I think, like you already talked about, that people overestimate is taxes. Yes, your payroll taxes will go down naturally because if you're not receiving any payroll income or less payroll income, that will naturally go down. But other income in retirement can replace it as far as the taxation goes.
Well, too, when you're in retirement planning mode and you're working in your career, you're saving money for your retirement, which is likely, could be 10%. Plus you're paying your FICA, which is like a little over 7, right? So that's 17% right there. Plus the fact you might have other things that you're pitching in for and your insurance. So let's talk a little bit about where some of these expenses go. I think we have a graph that's a little bit earlier. The idea here is to look at this and say, well, here's where a working budget is when you're working, and here's a retirement budget.
Right. And so some of the things you'll see here are ones we just discussed, pretty big drops when you're working versus in retirement on the commuting, the meals, the payroll taxes. But one of the things we didn't touch on is actually an increase. And I think that's where people sometimes gloss over of thinking, well, could there actually be things that go up in retirement? And, probably the biggest of all is healthcare costs. Mm-hmm. Last time I looked it up, I believe the cost for a married couple in retirement on healthcare costs, this includes your insurance payments, your out-of-pocket costs, etc., was north of $350,000 for a married couple throughout their entire retirement.
Right. So you're talking like 20, 25 years of retirement, those healthcare costs, because, again, you're going to be on Medicare or you're going to be on some plan that has been provided for you through your company. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that do get cheaper.
Yeah. So the couple we didn't touch on, debt payments. I think the goal for a lot of people is to be as debt free as possible in retirement. So maybe that mortgage is paid off. Maybe it's not. In today's day and age, it's a little less common to be completely debt free. It's actually not always necessary. We have that discussion with clients all the time of locking too much money up in their home equity and trying to pay off a mortgage.
Right. And just as people understand that out there is that, when you have this asset that's sitting it's in your home and, you've got a mortgage on the home. Well, the truth is the mortgage payment's probably cheaper than going out and renting somewhere. That's for sure. You're also building equity in your home. But the equity in your home it grows organically. But to take off all of your investment assets that are growing likely at a higher rate, we hope, than your mortgage cost is, to take all of that out and then pay down your mortgage could be self-defeating. But it's not black and white, and not every case is perfect. But there are times to carry a mortgage is a wise thing.
Right. Right. And then I think one of the taxes that also may go down, we talked about taxes maybe not decreasing, but one big one that could is potentially some state taxes. A lot of retirees sometimes tend to relocate states, to a tax-friendly state. And then even if you don't relocate, a lot of states do have some preferential tax treatment of retiree benefits. For example, here in Massachusetts, there's no tax on Social Security.
Correct.
And so little things like that. Some states even have no tax on like 401k income,
right,
pension income. And so if you live in those states, you don't even necessarily have to be relocating. You could get a little bit of a state tax deduction, while your federal tax might not be all that different. Your state taxes very well could go down, but there's 50 states, 50 different sets of rules. That's a state-by-state,
right,
case-by-case scenario.
That's why any plan that you do for retirement, it's just not some black and white cookie cutter model. It's got to be used for you. And so where you live does have an effect on how much income that you need. So in these states, let's look at this chart for a moment here. And we got taxile living state snapshot here. When you look at people that are no Social Security tax states, you've got a pretty high percentile of states. Over 40% of them have no Social Security tax for the state income tax. Pension friendly, where pensions, you've got a good number, about 15% of the states offer some type of pension. I believe, I'm not a tax accountant. Pennsylvania was one of them.
But East Illinois.
Illinois is another one. So, you want to look at some of these conditions. Obviously, if you don't have any relatives there, you're going to be out alone in the middle of Pennsylvania somewhere, hunting goose or something. I don't know. But you got to be careful about where you go. But what gets more expensive, as we talked to earlier, is healthcare can be. I mean, Medicare insurance costs are a little bit lower than the normal costs that are going on out there, but you still have deductibles and prescriptions and things like that. Home repairs are also things that could get more expensive over time, just simply because the cost of getting the work done becomes more expensive.
Right. And inflation, houses age too, they are naturally, just like our bodies, our houses age are naturally going to have more wear and tear. You need to replace that roof, repave the driveway, whatever it might be, and replace some appliances that have gotten older. Even if the cost of those goods don't necessarily go up, you just simply comes time you got to replace them as they age and break down.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the cost of cars as we're doing this today. Just the cost of an average vehicle here in the United States is $40,000. Yeah, for a new car. And I can date myself real quickly going back to the 1970s, where a new car might be 10 grand. So it's gone up 4 times in value. But let's talk about the major categories you should consider when you are going to retire. The first one's housing. Where are you going to live? And do you really need to have 2 homes? We talk a lot with our retirees that, are wanting to get a second home. When we look at the expense of it and we look at the overall, for a lot of people, they end up deciding that the best way for them to go is to go and travel for, months in the winter here in New England, travel away, go 3 weeks somewhere, come back for a couple weeks and go another place, rather than trying to own a property and then having all that maintenance and work over the course of a whole year. That's not black and white for everybody, but for a lot of people, it gives them the freedom to be able to travel and do the things that they want to do without having to be, solid down in one spot.
Yeah, I mean, having a long-term Airbnb, long-term rental, for a month to 2 months in the winter instead of owning a condo or something like that down south is in a lot of cases going to be more cost effective, and try to keep that housing expense, which you can see on this chart, the biggest one it is of that spending breakdown, and trying to keep that as limited as as cost effective.
It is. And I tell you, one of my clients over the years have gotten into that point where they get into their late 70s, early 80s. They got this place somewhere, and they go down for the winter, but the family doesn't really go down anymore. And the family's not at a point where they're wanting to inherit it or travel there. So now they find themselves with a property that they, because of health and other issues, they don't want to travel there anymore. Now they're end up having to sell it, which I guess is okay, and hopefully they make some money on it. But the truth is, it may not be a lifestyle that's as permanent as they think.
Right.
When you're making those kind of.
And that gives you a little more flexibility. If you're not going to have to eventually offload a property down there. I mean, we have some clients right now who are, considering that for some homes down south, and it's just become, too much for them to make that trip and to travel every single year, every single summer or winter, et cetera. And, it's it can be a little bit of a burden or something that, bogs you down at a certain age. And
yeah. And what's in this pie chart that makes me curious, but I know what the answer is, but the other is almost a quarter of all the expenses. The stuff that kind of goes in there, this could be the vacations, this could be gift giving to your children or grandchildren or to people that you care about. I mean, then you got transportation, food, and healthcare all kind of muddled in together. Right. But these are real expenses. And yeah, we do plan for people to have about a 20 to 25% additional cushion because there is the other.
There is. And so in our next episode, we'll talk more about kind of building this budget.
Yeah.
I think we've got some, more of a detailed breakdown of how to go about that. But I think the point here is, as you're envisioning this lifestyle, have your own spending breakdown, have your own budget in place, and, either do it yourself, work with an advisor that can kind of help you get a grasp over your spending, so you're not, you're not surprised by the unexpected.
So our goal is to give you the retirement spending smile. This is retirement the retirement spending really typically forms a smile, like you're happy with it. And basically in your early 60s or so, if you're retired, traveling and hobbies becomes very important as well, even into your lower to mid 70s. But it's a natural slowdown at this point. In fact, over the years, found that when people get to be in that mid 70 range, their spending habits end up reducing pretty significantly. We've narrowed it down to about 11 to 12% from the mid 70s going onward. Now, as they get into the 80s, then healthcare becomes more expensive, and some of those savings get shifted where before it wasn't true, but they're not traveling as much, so it offsets itself. And we really do need for all of our clients to have a realistic plan that accounts for this shift, both in the aging process as well as the demand for money. So we find that the demand for money in the retirement spending smile is a lot higher at the beginning. And that's when you're healthy and you're able to do the things you want to do and pursue your hobbies. I think we have a chart for that somewhere along the way here. Ah, there it is, the retirement spending smile. That's because it's precipitous. It goes climbing up, and then it gets to peak at a point, and it goes downward. So on that note, we do want to look at the curve as a way it represents the actual changing expenses.
It does. And it's, I think the idea there is that that overall situation you want to have, to get some specifics, you want to have a plan in place to account for all of those different scenarios as your spending might change. You want to have a little bit of a surplus fund in the early years to pay for that extra cost of travel or hobbies and things of that nature. Yeah, maybe you need a little less in those mid 70s, like we were talking about, as you kind of slow down. But then you also want to have a plan in place for those later years as you get into your 80s, where medical is a larger need. And maybe that's, again, having larger surpluses for those expenses. Maybe it's also considering things like long-term care insurance, or even just your standard health insurance, making sure that you're shifting your coverage to meet your needs as you have, more and more medical issues as you naturally get older. So I think that's the kind of put a bow on that and wrap it together is that's the plan for that. It's one thing to know that, hey, my expenses are going to change, but it's another thing to then, build in the stopgaps to make sure that as you're hitting each of those stages, you're not hit by that surprise. You're not hit by that unexpected expense. And then you're spending money that you don't have, and it can kind of really, derail a retirement.
And where that really comes in is, to backtrack a little bit, it's really the honeymoon phase. When people first retire, they see all this cash coming in for the retirement accounts and all that stuff. And it's really easy to think, oh, well, let's do this, let's do that. But there is a bigger spike at the early end of retirement. And there should be, you got the big trips, maybe upgrading the home a little bit, doing some celebration spending. It's okay to do, and it's a healthy dynamic if it's planned for, but it becomes risky if not, because if you spend too much at the beginning, you're not going to have enough in the middle or at the end. And that's the worst time to be cutting back, when you really need it the most.
Right. Because then I think the big issue there is not even just necessarily, you, the individual, having not enough in retirement, but then at times too, and this is something I think a lot of, retirees don't want to have happen, is not only just you're running short of money, but you can also then potentially become a little bit of a burden on family members, kids, to then have them step in, because what kid wants to see their parent struggle financially in retirement? That's something that's a kind of an ancillary byproduct, if you will, of, not only having proper retirement planning or improper retirement planning affecting you, but affecting your loved ones.
Well, I find that at the beginning, there's a lot of times people, they retire, and the first thing they want to do is they want to gift money to their kids or their grandchildren, and getting people to pause and step back and help them to realize that this is a longer term plan that we need to put in place is a big part of that honeymoon phase, where all of a sudden, all of this wealth seems to be there. It's always was there, but now it's right in front of them as they're planning out the retirement. And it's only healthy, and it only works if you put a plan together for it. So the lifestyle cost exercise is a good place to begin. First one is you list your top 5 someday window activities. So how do people do that?
Yeah, just think about, if we were talking about at the beginning, what do you enjoy doing? And that's where actually also too, is if you're on that glide path into retirement, it kind of gives you the ability to maybe start to explore some of those hobbies, because you've even had, I think, clients in the past that start to have this, we walk them through this sort of thought exercise, and they start mentioning things that they've never done before. It's like, well, how long are you going to do that? You're going to start this brand new hobby that maybe you've never done, maybe you don't know how to do. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. That could be a perfect time to learn something new, learn a new skill, and, ultimately, be able to take that new skill with you into retirement.
Yeah, I mean, following your dreams does not need to become a nightmare. Right. All of a sudden, what did I do? I spent $10,000 on all this photography equipment, and I'm not doing a thing with it. I mean, that would be awful. Because if you spend $10,000 on the equipment selling it, you're lucky if you get 40 cents on the dollar. Right. So, you got to be careful about some of those things. But estimate the annual cost. You write down the things that you want to do. And if you can't think of anything to do, then that's a lifestyle issue. Because if all of your life, it's only been your career, you've only been working, it's not a healthy dynamic. So it's really good to start planning on that now. Know the things that you really want to do. And I've often said to people, if you're not doing it now, it's not likely you're going to do it in retirement. Right. Because if that someday window doesn't have momentum built into it, then it's likely you might spend a whole lot of money, a whole lot of time, and find out it was a waste to do both.
Exactly.
So it's good to do it while you're working. It's good to do figure it out. And for those people out there that think, well, I'll just volunteer my time. Volunteering your time can be really healthy, but it's like, why did the retiree throw away his briefcase?
I don't know why.
Because it smelled like deadlines. People can get so involved with volunteer work, which is passionate and wonderful, but all of a sudden they're stressed out.
It's like, oh,
yeah, exactly. It becomes real work. So we got to be really careful. All right. So we're really at this conclusion today, but we really want to inspire you as a listener and a viewer to consider your someday window. Look through that window. It's sunny, it's bright. What do you see out there? What do you want to have in that vision? Because today we covered some lifestyle drivers, changing expenses, healthcare costs, taxes, inflation's real, it's never going to go away. So what's next?
Yeah, I think the next step is, once you've envisioned this lifestyle, let's quantify it. Let's put numbers to that lifestyle. And again, we kind of let it a little bit into that today. But we'll talk more about that next time and discuss saying, well, how do you actually then turn these things into real life numbers, real life budgets? And then from there, map out your retirement to see, do the potential outflows, this budget you've built, do your inflows meet those outflows? And that kind of helps give you the answer, whether it's using different retirement software, whether it's just doing it more back of the napkin math. That's the concept behind mapping out your retirement and avoiding, the nervousness and the different phobias that come with spending down your nest egg.
Yeah, and those withdrawal strategies, we always have to make sure they're sustainable as planners to make sure it can last your lifetime. Well, thank you for listening today. We're really glad you joined us. And remember, live today for the tomorrow that's in your heart.
Because you never have more time to plan for tomorrow than you do today.
Thank you for being with us.
Bread and butter.